Okay, we're back talking about reproduction and development and focusing on reproduction. And in this video, we're comparing sexual and asexual reproduction. So, what is variation? Variation in a population is caused by genetic differences between individuals of the same species. It's the result of processes that evolve within meiosis to increase something called genetic diversity. Now, those terms may seem very foreign. Genetic differences, genetic diversity, variation. Really, all it means is when you compare members of the same species, like these giraffes, their spotted patterns are all different because of genetic diversity. It's a result of random combinations. So this is an example of variation. Here's another example of variation. These clamshells, all members of the same species, but the pattern is very different. That's because of randomization in how gene combinations work their way into gametes. And one more example, human beings, eye color, right? There are, pretty standard sets of eye colors, but there are different combinations that produce in between colors. And again, that is the result of random combinations of DNA when gametes are formed. How that happens? Well, one way it happens is in the process of meiosis, just by how the assortment, the arrangement, and the combinations that take place when gametes are formed. Look at the diagram here. You can see that in both examples, we're starting with the same number of chromosomes. So there are 4 total chromosomes in the parent cell. But how those chromosomes wind up pulling apart and arranging themselves in the resulting daughter cells is unique. You get a unique arrangements, or unique combinations in each of the daughter cells during meiotic divisions. Now, this is only 4 chromosomes. Could you imagine for a human when there are 46 chromosomes, the possible combinations, the permutations that would take place to produce unique and random assortments? And that's one of the reasons why variations exist. So one other way that variation takes place and genetic exchange takes place also during meiosis in the early stages, parts of chromosomes overlap and wind up switching places. They almost exchange positions from one chromosome to another. This happens naturally. It's happening when chromosomes are being pulled apart. Pieces of one chromosome replace another, and vice versa. So you wind up with these really unique combinations in the end. So this is called crossing over, and it happens during meiosis. And the result of crossing over and random assortment of genetic combinations is that no 2 sperm or egg cells will ever have the same genetic combination. So focusing on sexual reproduction, all right, as a strategy for success. Sexual reproduction involves gametes or sex cells, and we've said this already, join in a process called fertilization. And each parent is supplying half of the genetic information needed to make a full individual, right? So 23 plus 23 equals 46. And sexual reproduction, as we already detailed, produces unique variations. So in this example, you have puppies that look like the parents, but also have unique features in comparison to each other because they have half of the dad's and half of the mom's genetic information, and you wind up with unique combinations. Bringing asexual reproduction back into this picture, you can say that there are some advantages to asexual reproduction. It's easy to do, right? You don't need a second parent. You just need one cell. It occurs very quickly. It doesn't take a lot of time to divide. And it allows cells to take over very quickly. In the case of something like a red tide, which is an algal bloom that can happen um, in the water and kill a lot of fish and affect the water. That happens relatively quickly because of asexual reproduction that can just quickly populate the area, colonize the area. Now, advantages for sexual reproduction. Offspring have a better chance of survival due to their genetic variation. Because there's genetic diversity, they have a better survivability as a result. And it also creates disease immunity. Just by those random combinations, some offspring are going to be better suited to survive and resist certain diseases than others, and that increases their survivability. In terms of disadvantages, asexual reproduction produces offspring that have the same genetic information. There's no genetic diversity, there's no variation. For sexual reproducing organisms, it requires a lot of energy. And I'm not talking about what you think I'm talking about. I'm talking about finding a mate. So for animals that have to find a mate, it does require a lot of energy to court that mate, maybe to fight a rival. It's not easy, but the payoff is great, because when you sexually reproduce, you're producing offspring that are the mix of your DNA and your mate's DNA, which gives them a much better chance of surviving, which is really, from the first video we talked about, the goal of living things. So just to give you an example of how one thing may be better than another, this is a bacteria reproducing time-lapse over a 12-hour period. You can see how it can go from 2 to many very quickly. This is why you get sick when it comes to bacterial infections, because they quickly take advantage of the situation. But with a lot of bacteria, you can use antibiotics that wipes them out. And the reason why it wipes them all out at once is because they all have the same DNA. They all are really carbon copies. They're all copies of each other. And since they're all copies, they have no genetic diversity. And if they have no genetic diversity, the right antibiotic will knock them all out at the same time. Bacteria aren't the only organisms that do this. This is a pando tree or pando forest. And each individual tree is an asexual replicate of a parent tree. So when this forest first started to grow, the original parent tree took advantage of the wide open space and began to asexually reproduce. And it's great because it took over the area and created this whole forest of trees that all are genetically identical. The problem with that is if there's an environmental change that these trees aren't prepped for or can't handle, they all get wiped out together. So while asexual reproduction can be advantageous in some situations, it is a dangerous game if the environment changes drastically. And that's it for now. So thanks for watching.